Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode of this YouTube channel. So, for today's topic, we'll basically be looking at the ways that the COVID-19 pandemic, has affected education. And as our guest today, we have Justin Yoon, who's a student at Chatter International School. Justin, um, could you quickly introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Justin and I'm a freshman in Chadwick. Just thanks for having me on
Yep.
the interview.
Yes. Oh, and actually, I just remember, Justin, you also have a YouTube channel, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Yep. So
McLaren F1 unboxing.
yeah, yeah, and I've
That's
seen a
right.
couple of your videos and they're really good. So to our audience, if you're interested, make sure to check that out. So to begin with our interview, so basically my very first question is, obviously the pandemic, it has affected education in a lot of different ways, both positive and negative. So my first question to you is, what is the greatest challenge that you faced so far as a result of the pandemic?
I think the greatest challenge is that the way the teachers grade our assessments are basically the same, whether it's distance learning or on campus, but the way we like learn in class is really different. So when we're on Zoom, it's a lot harder to like focus or actually understand what the teachers are trying to teach. But then the assessments are still graded the same way. So I feel like a lot of my scores, some of my scores went down, and the assessments itself are a lot like more challenging.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm sure a lot of students can relate to that. Obviously, the IB, it's not like the criteria for all of the different summative and formatives got easier.
Yeah,
They're all the same criteria. Maybe some projects might have been adapted slightly differently, so that it can operate under the modular learning system. But yeah, I think a lot of students, especially at the start of the pandemic, faced a lot of difficulties regarding um, adapting to this new type of system and also trying to maintain their grades throughout.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we've looked at greatest challenge. So on the other hand, what do you think, if there were any, what do you think was the most positive change or most positive outcome of the pandemic?
I would say just everyone's more comfortable with using Zoom, like we're doing right now. I feel like if there wasn't a pandemic, we wouldn't really do video calls as often, and kind of helps if you because we just use GChat to communicate with our teachers. And if we need any help, we can just video call them. So I think that helps compared to before.
Yeah. And I think I know in one of my previous interviews, I was looking at the ways in which the pandemic has affected our economy. And one of the things that the guest speaker for that interview mentioned was how, obviously, as a society as a whole, we've transitioned from more offline activities to more online activities. So, like you mentioned, Zoom calls, G chats, all of that are things that happen online in the online space.
Yeah.
And definitely, I think there are a lot of advantages to that. The major one being what you just mentioned, more accessibility.
Yeah.
Obviously, students are able to reach out to teachers and other students a lot more easily online than offline. All right, so obviously there are a lot of other positive and negative implications of the pandemic on education. But before we move on to any of those more detailed implications, overall, would you say the pandemic has had a more positive or a more negative impact?
No negative.
Negative.
Yeah.
Um, could you maybe give a couple of reasons why you think it's more negative than positive?
Oh well, for me, it's a lot to do with like my hobbies. Like I like to play basketball with my friends, and uh, before I would just play with my friends every day. but at school as well during lunch. But now it's obviously harder to do that. And also, I guess just things were a lot easier before there was like a pandemic, so we could eat dinner whenever we want, or we didn't have to worry about certain things. And also in school, there's a lot more to like be aware of, and it can get stressful as well.
Right. Yeah, definitely. With the pandemic, obviously, there's a lot of regulations, new regulations, that we need to keep in mind. I know a lot of students in my particular grade level have some trouble following all of those regulations. But obviously, they're in place for our own safety. So it is important that we do try and follow them as much as possible. Um, I know some. So from what you've said so far, I'm gonna guess that you're one of those students who would prefer actually going to school, right? Physically, offline.
Yeah, sometimes of course I'll prefer online learning because you can wake up later and those things.
Right.
But if you're doing it for like a whole school year, I think to benefit my education, just going to school is a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason obviously that I say that is I know a lot of students who prefer online learning, and I also know a lot of students who prefer offline learning. Um, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Online learning, obviously, you can wake up a little bit later. It's a little bit more relaxed in terms of, um, I guess, your schedule,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also like your attire, stuff like that. You can kind of, you don't have to be, um, you know, dressed in formal clothing. I mean, Chatham International School is one of those schools where you don't really have school uniforms, but I'm uh, speaking in more general terms. I know a lot of other schools, like Korean public schools, they require you to wear uniforms and stuff like that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
guess online, that's a bit different. That's probably a little bit more relaxed in those regards. So another important question, obviously, would be: do you think, assuming that the pandemic either ends or kind of dies down to the point where it's not really as significant of a safety risk as it
Yeah.
is right now, or as it has been the last couple of months, do you think that schools will return eventually to full offline um, learning systems? Or do you think that some remnants of what we are working with right now with the modular learning system might remain?
Uh, I think for like regular schools, like a regular school curriculum, I think we're gonna go back to like full offline learning throughout the whole year. But I feel like there's gonna be a lot more opportunities for like smaller like hagwons or academies that are gonna use online platforms, which will just be more convenient for them. But overall, I think for school, like even this year when there was like a small break with the cases going down, we'll just go to full offline straight away. I think it's just gonna be like that in the future.
Yeah. And I think to kind of look at it from a slightly different perspective, uh, obviously with the modular learning system, and recently one of the advantages, I guess, of the modular learning system and just being online in general has been the fact that we've been able to reach out and work together with a lot of different communities around the world that
Yeah.
aren't necessarily physically close to wherever we are. And I think that might be something that remains, right? Obviously, Zoom, I think the usage of Zoom for events like that are probably, my guess would be they probably remain or are going to be used consistently in the future as well. Can you think of any other examples, maybe, of ways in which whatever we're using right now, I'm going to guess predominantly Zoom, might be applied to other aspects of our life, of our school life?
I think for school life, I guess right now, for example, in our like we can right now in our school we have certain activities where we communicate with other schools, like such in my club for Kenya Service Learning. We'd have like a few Zoom calls with the school in Kenya, and also in my like athletics and swimming. We're not we do competitions virtually. Where we just compare our times. I think those kind of aspects are like advantageous to just keep it like this. So I guess you can apply them in the future.
Yeah. And I think you brought up an interesting point, which is extracurriculars. Obviously, this year, a lot of extracurriculars have modified what they used to do to fit this our current circumstance, which is that we can't really physically meet. And even when we do, obviously, with the hybrid learning system, for in the case of CI, it's only like once every other week or something like that that we can actually physically be together. Um, so obviously there have been drastic changes to those systems. I'm gonna guess that if we return back to a full offline or mostly offline curriculum, that those extracurriculars might shift back to being offline. But do you think, just based on your experiences in the clubs that you've been part of, that that is something that might happen? Or do you think, like you just said, that maybe some of those online aspects that are more advantageous might be kept?
Oh, well, it kind of depends on the context, but a lot of clubs they involve a lot of teamwork and group projects, and that involves a lot of communication. And I think in the future, like if possible, just they'll just try to keep it offline, as a lot of these clubs can't really function in a hybrid system or fully online.
Yes. But also, I think I'm not sure if you know this, but a lot of the clubs that existed in the past school years, um, a lot of them kind of fell apart after the pandemic started just because they weren't quite sure how to proceed without being able to physically meet together. And I know a lot of course, there were clubs that not were able to successfully modify their projects to fit the current circumstances, but an equal amount of clubs, or maybe even more, just kind of fell apart and they were replaced by new clubs. Do you think that something similar might happen once we start transitioning back to the offline system, where these clubs that kind of got used to the online system might suddenly now um, be unsure as to how to proceed offline?
I think that some of the clubs will, but I think most of them will be able to adapt to going back to fully offline, and especially because a lot of these clubs they've like they were made in the past, so they would already have the basic like infrastructure and those kind of things to be able to function. And maybe some of the newer clubs that were made during the pandemic, maybe they will struggle, but I feel like overall it'll be pretty easy to transition.
Yep. All right. And now to kind of go back to your original point, what you first said in response to my very first question, we'll kind of be doing that a couple of times in this interview. Um, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned the criteria and the assessing of projects and how that wasn't really changed or altered to fit the current circumstances. If you had, if let's say, if you were the IB coordinator or if you were the teacher and you had the opportunity to modify some of those criteria, in general terms, what would be some of those key things that you would alter to make life easier for the students?
Well, I think first of all, for those kind of like assessments that are mainly like criterion A, kind of like a testing your knowledge, I'll just put a lot less content, just like overall have like less stuff to answer or memorize, because if we actually like go into our online classes, there's like it's really hard to just get done. Like it's really hard to study the same way or pay attention the same way in class. So obviously those kind of assessments, I feel like they have to be changed accordingly, and just overall just make it easier. And also we for some reason like some we have a lot of summatives that are still group projects, and that was kind of strange to do on Zoom or doing summatives with a partner because we can't meet in person. So I think we'll just change that. I'll just change that as well.
Yeah, so I think the kind of 2 points with are just in general kind of make the content aspect of the projects a little bit easier.
Yeah,
And
like
then the
less demand.
second part is less group projects, so more individual projects is what I'm
Yeah.
getting.
Yeah.
And then you brought up a point that's obviously very interesting, which is it's harder to pay attention and focus when the classes are online.
Yeah.
So I think, would you say that, would you be able to maybe pinpoint some of the key reasons why that might be happening?
Okay. Well, I won't really mention like any specific names, but
Yeah, no.
some of my classes, for example, like one of my classes in like specifically, whenever it's online, it's either going to be an asynchronous meeting or the meeting will last like about 5 minutes after the teacher explains the instructions. And obviously that's really different from offline class. So sometimes it's all right because you basically get a free block. But then when there are assessments or those kind of things, it's pretty stressful because you're basically doing the assessment by yourself, just like on your own, just by reading the TSI, and you don't get an actual class. And also, I feel like a lot of teachers don't really modify their class like preparations for online or offline. So what an online class looks like is basically the same as in person, where they have like their lesson notes on the slides and they'll share their screen and they'll just read off that. And when you're just staring at your computer screen, it's not engaging at all, and it's really easy to get sidetracked by things like your phone or Kakao Talk or just thinking about other things, because especially when their face is like really small on their screen and they don't have any hand motions or anything like that, they're just talking, it's really easy to just filter those things out, so it's harder to pay attention.